Ready? Thank you, Father. So author Hunter S. Thompson once described the music business. He said, the music business is a shallow money pit, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men go to die like dogs. There's also, he said, a negative side. And, I suppose it wasn't all that bad, quite as bad as that. I did spend 25 years in the music business, and I do suppose that it probably made my journey to Orthodoxy a little bit more challenging than most careers, right? In fact, I teach the Road to Orthodoxy class here at the Cathedral, and most of our classes are done over Zoom. And behind my desk in my office is this wall of platinum records, and when people see that, they immediately ask, like, how does someone live that lifestyle and navigate the waters of becoming Orthodox? In fact, how does someone live that lifestyle and end up teaching a class on becoming Orthodox? And, I guess that's how teachers are made sometimes. St. John Climacus once said, "Let those who are humbled by their passions take courage, for even if they fall into every pit and are caught by every snare, when they attain health, they will become healers, beacons and luminaries, teaching about all manners of sickness and helping those who are about to fall." Well, I don't know about being a luminary, and I'm certainly no beacon for anybody, but I have become a teacher. And I tell the people who take my class, like, look, I'm not an expert on theology or patristics or even liturgics, but I have a doctorate in doing this wrong. I have a master's degree in surrounding myself with people and things that don't bring me closer to God, in stubbornly refusing to ask for help, and in just doing everything the wrong way. I've stepped in every mud puddle along the way, and I am strengthened by the understanding that with every misstep comes a modicum of wisdom, even if it's learning where not to tread. And so tonight I may not be able to show you where to go on your Lenten journey, but I can certainly point down a few dead-end roads that I've wandered down, and in doing so, hopefully shorten your journey along the way. So tonight, I'm going to share a couple of stories with my time in the music business, and through those two stories, 3 lessons that have helped me along my journey to truly becoming Orthodox. And we're going to start with a story by an artist that most people should know, John Bon Jovi, or the band Bon Jovi. So John is probably the smartest, pure businessman that I ever had a pleasure to work with. I mean, John's a pro, right? He works hard. He hires good people. He pays them well. He shows up on time, ready to work. John was a joy to work with, an absolute professional. It was always those kids that thought they were special just because they could sing that were the problems. I remember this one kid after a show, he was backstage smoking a cigarette, and he looked at me and he goes, "We're the biggest thing to hit America since the bomb." And I looked at him and I'm like, well, first of all, you might want to pump the brakes on that, Sven, because first of all, the bomb never hit America, and you're playing a 500-seat venue outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, so no, you're not. But anyways, but John was the exact opposite. He was an absolute consummate professional. He was here in town for a show with the band at Phillips Arena the next night, and so he and I, his manager, and an executive from Island Def Jam, a woman named Trina Luth, we were all having drinks at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead, what's now the Whitley, I think. So, by the way, John ordered a Pinot Grigio with crushed ice in it, and looks at the server and goes, "Sorry, but that's just the way I enjoy it." And you know what? It's Pinot Grigio. He's not hurting anybody. Let him drink it any way he wants to, right? So, John's regaling us with stories about he and his family spending time with Elton John at Elton's place in France when the topic of American Idol comes up. And John just sort of offhandedly says, "I could never win a contest like that." And we're all looking at him like he's crazy. I mean, this is Bon Jovi. And whether y'all realize it or not, or how successful they are, but Bon Jovi at the time was the 3rd most successful touring band of all time. Just behind the Rolling Stones and U2, it was Bon Jovi. Not, Travis Tritt or Garth Brooks or the Eagles or Guns N' Roses or anybody else, but it was John Bon Jovi. So they sold $1.6 billion in concert tickets alone. This is an enormously successful band, far more successful than any winner of American Idol has ever been. So Trina, I think, was the one that asked him, like, why would you think that? Why would you say that? And like I said, John's smart, and he goes, I'm not that good of a singer. And to be fair, John's a perfectly fine singer, especially for the genre that he's in. But he knows better than anybody what made Bon Jovi as successful as they were wasn't his talent as a vocalist. Author Stephen King once said that talent is as common as table salt. And the thing that differentiates a good, successful artist and one who's not is a lot of hard work. And what made Bon Jovi successful was a lot of hard work. If you want to be successful at anything, you got to work at it. And quite frankly, for the first 10 years of my being Orthodox, I didn't work at it. And I'm not talking about like Orthodox Christianity. It's Christianity but harder. You know, we have long services and we stand the whole time and we fast really hard. I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing the heavy lifting of what it actually means to be Christian, of repentance, of loving my neighbor, of forgiving people that have done me great harm. And like I said, for the first 10 years of my being Orthodox, I didn't do any of that. Now, when I met the most beautiful, wonderful woman in the entire world, my wife, Lisa Apostolou, I was coming over from the Episcopal or Anglican church. And my father once described the Anglican church as believing in everything in moderation, including religion. And I suppose I probably brought some of that mindset, that phronema, with me into my own catechesis. Now, my catechesis was done here at the Cathedral under Father Homer back in the day. And our classes were simply to read through Kallistos Ware's The Orthodox Church. Like, that's what we did in classes. We just read through that book. And if you're not familiar, it's a classic, right? It's the who's, what's, where's, and why's of Orthodoxy. What do we believe? Why do we believe it? Little history of the church, the 7 ecumenical councils. We don't worship iconography, despite what your Protestant pastor may have told you, that sort of stuff, right? It's important information. Like I said, I teach the Road to Orthodoxy class here at the Cathedral, and we cover much of the same ground in those classes. So I read every word in that book. And when I finished it, I closed it up and I'm like, exactly. This is exactly what I believe. No notes, 5 stars. I'm good. Thank you. And so 13 weeks later, boom, congratulations, you're an Orthodox Christian. But was I? Was I really? Because I can know everything that there is to know about the University of Georgia football team. Like, I can know all the players and all the plays and where they went to high school, you know, and the history of the team and all that stuff. It doesn't make me a football player, right? I can go and sign up for a class tomorrow on Buddhism and learn everything that there is to know about Buddhism. It wouldn't make me a Buddhist. It's just information. But, you know, over the next few years, I'll learn to cross myself the same way as everybody else did, and I'd light the candle the same way as everybody else, and I'd kiss the icon the same way, and I'd look at the little yaya when it was time to stand up when she stood up, and sit down when she sits down. You know, I even learned the patrimon in Greek, right? What more is there? So I believed everything that everybody else did in that church, and I did it the exact same way as everybody else did in that church. But what you couldn't tell from looking at me from the outside is I was a dumpster fire of a human being, because I didn't love my neighbor. I didn't forgive anybody. When I finally went to confession 10 years in, I confessed to Christ and to Father Paul. I said, I don't know whether you remember this, Father Paul. I said, you know, I wouldn't be so angry all the time if everybody else wasn't such an idiot. I said, I know that Christ said to love thy neighbor, but have you met my neighbors? I'm pretty sure Christ's neighbors cut their grass once in a while. So I was angry, just so angry all the time, and it was everybody else's fault but my own. And I judged everybody, and I judged everything. You know, you can almost hear, thank you, Lord, that I'm not like these other men, falling from my lips. But my biggest sin wasn't the burden of anger or judgment, but rather it was pride. Right? The sin of pride. Just a little thing that St. Augustine said will turn angels into demons. I'm sure I'll be fine. But it was pride that led me to attaching my entire identity to a job, to a title, to pleasing and impressing other people. You see, if anybody pointed to me and said, who's that? They'd tell you, that's Scott Davenport. He works with Island Def Jam. That was my identity, right? And I liked being Scott Davenport from Island Def Jam. Like, I liked being Scott Davenport from Island Def Jam in the same way that if you ever meet someone who went to Harvard, it's not too far into the conversation before they let you know that they went to Harvard. That was me, right? I liked being the person that if you needed a signed guitar from Justin Bieber, you called me. I liked being the person that if you needed tickets and backstage passes to the Rihanna show in Miami, I was your guy, right? That was my identity. That's who I was, right? And identity is important. We talk a lot about identity these days, and identity is important. It grounds us in the world and gives meaning to everything that we do, right? Our beliefs of who we are reflect our actions and beliefs, and our actions in the world reflect back of how we think about ourselves and our identity. So identity is important, and there's no Christianity within that identity. There's just vainglory and greed and gluttony and materialism. But there's no Christianity. There's no repentance. There's no love of neighbor. There's no forgiveness in that identity, right? You might find a family member that would point to me and say he's a son, he's a father, he's a husband. But you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody to say, that's Scott Davenport, he's an Orthodox Christian. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, we went to church. Like, I liked going to church. I mean, not every week. I traveled a lot, but every other week or so, not for the long services. We wouldn't see us here for Holy Thursday. But we would go to church, and every time I went, I liked going to church. I would actually say to my wife out loud in that parking lot, I'm glad I did that. I would literally say it out loud, I'm glad I did that, right? Church made me feel better. Like when you go to the gym, you maybe didn't want to, but you went anyway, and you walk out and you think, I'm glad I did that. Or when you order the salad rather than the cheeseburger and fries and milkshake, and you think, I'm glad I did that, right? That's the way church was for me. Every single time I'd say it, like I said, out loud, I'm glad I did that. But if you just listen to the language I'm using with myself, right, you might pick up where the problem is. Being an Orthodox Christian wasn't who I was. It was just something I did. I'm glad I did that, right? It wasn't who I was. It wasn't a part of my identity. It was just another activity, something I did once in a while, every other Sunday or so for a couple of hours. And I suppose it probably could have gone on this way for indefinitely, but I was having an issue with my oldest daughter, and I wanted to talk to a priest about it. Father Paul hadn't been here long, and I hadn't met the man yet, so I made an appointment and go to his office, and we're having a lovely conversation, as one does with Father Paul. And he just sort of offhandedly mentions the fullness of the church. And today I understand this is a very common phrase, but at the time I'd never heard it before. And it's kind of funny how God works sometimes. If you just listen, you can hear him knocking, right? If you just listen, you can hear the angels. And that's kind of the way this was for me. It was like, what is he talking about, the fullness of the church, right? And my sarcastic brain was like, is there something after the koleva that I'm missing? I mean, that's delicious. We could stick around if there's something more, but what more is there? Because I believe the same thing as everybody else does, and I do it the same way as everybody else does. So what more is there? Well, it turns out there's a story that comes from the sayings of the Desert Fathers that actually speaks directly to this. It's a famous story. Many of you have probably heard it, but in the story, a young novice monk goes to his elder. The young novice is Abba Lot, and he goes to his elder, Joseph, Abba Joseph of Panthesis, if you're keeping score. And he confesses to his Abba, look, Abba, I say my little monastic rule of prayer. I say my little office. I fast, I pray, I purify my thoughts as far as I'm able. What more is there? Exactly. Like what he said, right? What more is there? Because me and Abba Lot, we believe the same things as everybody else does, and we do it the same way as everybody else does. And sure, maybe we're going through the motions of what it looks like to be an Orthodox Christian without allowing any of it to affect our hearts in any way, shape, or form, but we'll put that aside for now. But anyway, in the story, Abba Joseph stood up, and his fingers became like 10 lamps of fire, and he says to the young novice, if you would only will it, my child, you could become all flame. If you could only will it. What that story tells me is that if I want a deeper relationship with God, a deeper experience of God in my day-to-day life, then I have to want it. And not just want it, I have to go out and get it. St. Diodicus of Photiki, who wrote in the 5th century, once said that true theology isn't information about God, but an experience of God. Well, if this is about an experience of God, if God's a person, not just a series of theological questions and answers and statements, if God's a person, then this is about a relationship. And if this is about a relationship, then this takes hard work. I mean, any relationship takes work. If I want a deeper relationship with my wife or my children, it takes work. It's not going to happen because I think it or believe it in my head, right? My time as a Protestant that we believe that all you had to do was believe in Jesus and you went to heaven. But you can believe in Jesus and be a dumpster fire of a human being. I'm evidence of that. Father John Bear from St. Vladimir's once said that the demons believe in Jesus, right? What are you doing? What do you want with us, Son of God? Why are you here before the time? The ones that are sent into the swine and then into the sea, they know who Christ is. They confess that he's Lord, right? So the big light bulb moment for me, the first lesson for me, was just the acknowledgement that there is more if we want it. And if we want it, we have to go out and get it. St. John Climacus once said, he who loves God must first love his neighbor, because the second is proof of the first. And so for me, it was just the recognition that there is more, but it started with the person beside me, the fact that repentance and love and forgiveness starts with my neighbor. If I want a deeper relationship with Christ in my life, it takes work. And that's the first lesson for me. That's what changed my trajectory and all of this stuff. Second story, two lessons from this story. Justin Bieber, who turned 30 this year, by the way. Justin Bieber was at that time 18 going on 19. He was 2 months shy of his 19th birthday. And it was around Christmas time. He was doing a show for Q100 here in Atlanta. Now, keep in mind, we've been working this kid like a dog since he was 13 years old. So since he was 13 years old, he'd had an adult job, right, with timelines and wake-up calls and long days on the road and all this stuff. The road is a brutal place for anybody. And so he's exhausted from all of that. He had worked and worked and worked, and now he's tired. He has no real friends around him, right? There's no one who loves him for who he is. Everyone around him either works for him or is paid by him or wants something from him, right? So no one's going to give him bad news. No one's going to tell him the truth about anything that he doesn't want to hear. And he's lost. He doesn't know who he is. He's been playing this role of teenage pop star since he was 13 years old, but that's not who anybody is, right? That's just a facade. That's just a role that you play, but it's not who you are, right? And so there's no one to guide him. There's no even real parent figure. Like his mom's around, but she's never been much help. Like he was as much a parent to her as she was to him, and Dad wasn't around until he was rich and famous. So no parent figure around him, no one to guide him through this time when he's moving from a young man to an adult. And he's lost and he's lonely and he's tired. Now, give that kid $650 million and then introduce that kid to drugs and alcohol that allow him to escape and hide from all of that. And who's surprised that this went sideways, right? Who could have seen this going the wrong way, right? So this is the beginning of all of that. So I show up to the show with my boss, a guy named Mike Chester. Mike's actually a Greek boy, and he's a Christodoulos on his mom's side, in fact. So Mike is cool in a way that I wish I was cool. Like, first of all, he's like model, actor, handsome, black hair, crystal blue eyes, chiseled features, right? He's from LA, so he's got this really nice, cool California vibe to him, but he lives and works in our New York office, so he's got great clothes. Like, Mike's cool just from the start, and he's also one of the nicest people you'll ever want to meet, right? So Mike and I go to the show, and we go backstage, and there must be 2,000 people backstage. It's the biggest meet and greet I've ever seen before. And the reason for that is they used to sell these VIP packages for $5,000. You get tickets in the first 10 rows and then a pass to go get your picture taken with Justin. So there are all these people back there, plus some Atlanta VIPs, like Ludacris was back there with his kids and some Atlanta dignitaries and all that stuff. And all these people were back there, and Justin wasn't there. Justin was late. So Mike and I go backstage and we find Scooter Braun, Justin's manager, and we're like, where's the kid? And he's like, I don't know, find the tour manager, which we thought, well, that was weird. So then we find the tour manager and we're like, okay, where's Justin? And she said, he's on his bus and he doesn't want to do the meet and greet tonight. And you could just tell these people had run out of answers, right? They had run out of favors. They'd been begging and cajoling this kid to do all the stuff that they'd set up to make as much money as possible, as quickly as possible. And they just run out of favors to ask this kid to do stuff. And so Mike and I go on the bus, and Justin's there with these two wannabe hip-hop kids, And all three of them are as high as a kite, like billows of smoke pouring off of the bus. The two hip-hop kids are sitting there giggling like two schoolgirls because they think all this is hilarious. And Justin and Mike start talking, and Justin tells him he doesn't want to do the meet and greet. And Mike takes an interesting tact. He goes, hey, man, you should probably do this, but like not as a favor to me, because if you do this or don't do this, I don't make any more money. I'm on salary. I make no extra money whether you do this or don't do this. So don't do this as a favor to me. But just so you know, this is going to cost you guys millions of dollars, because all those dads in there with their little girls, this is their Christmas present. So they're not going to just want their money back. They're going to want their pound of flesh, and they're going to sue the pants off of everybody here. So this is going to cost you millions. Or you could take the next 15 minutes and get your picture taken. But again, man, don't do this as a favor to me because I'm on salary. And Justin stood up and he did the meet and greet. And then the show went off without a hitch. I drove back to my house in Marietta. Mike got on a plane and flew back to New York. And Justin's career and bad behavior continued to spiral out of control. Eventually, Justin's team, far too late in my opinion, realized that Justin needed a mentor, a guide, someone who would help him. And they hired Mike Chester. And eventually Mike was able to focus Justin on the creative process of making music and get some of these hangers around away from him. So, two lessons from that story. The first one is pretty obvious, and that is that we all need a guide. We all need mentors in our lives. I would suggest that we can't and in fact shouldn't do orthodoxy by ourselves. And for the first 10 years of my being Orthodox, I didn't have a spiritual father. And I know that we have a long-standing history of spiritual fathers in the Orthodox Church, but you know, I thought that was for monks or people who went to Mount Athos, but not for me. I'd never even been to confession before. Father Paul mentioned in his homily on Sunday that, you know, some of the same stuff about confession. I'd never been to confession because my wife said that, well, in their Jorio, the priest from down the way would come and do the confession because they didn't want their priest to gossip or anything like that. So it sort of missed the point. So once I finally went to confession, what a gift that was, and realized what a gift that was to me, and have a spiritual father, that changed everything for me. I also liken it to like when you go to a wine tasting. You go to a wine tasting, they pour the wine out. My palate, I can tell you which wine I like better, right? I like this one better than that one. But then the sommelier comes by and he goes, okay, we'll take another sip and see if you can pick up hints of jammy fruit, raspberries or dark cherries or whatever. If it's a white wine, maybe it's pear or grapefruit or butter or oak. And you take another sip and you're like, oh my goodness, wow. That's all I can taste now. Well, those flavors had been there from the very beginning. They'd been there from the start. But you just needed a guide to say, look here for something more. Look here for a deeper experience than what you can discern using your own faculties and senses. Orthodox Christianity says that you and I can experience God in our day-to-day lives. And then it says, here's how. And they give us tools like, here's a Comboschini, here's a prayer book, here's the lives of the saints and the sayings of the desert fathers, here's the architecture and all this other stuff. It's all these tools are like here. You know, you read the lives of the saints, they become your guides. I remember reading St. Nectarius' story and recognizing, like, wait, he's not mad and angry all the time. You know, everything that he went through, and he's not mad, and I'm always mad because my neighbor's lawnmower broke down for the second time this month. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what's wrong with me? So we all needed a guide, and God knows I did. And so one more thing about guides. There are a lot of voices on the internet these days, and in all transparency, I am on the board at Ancient Faith. And there's some wonderful voices there, whether it's Presbytera Dr. Jeannie Constantinou or the guys from Lord of Spirits who are bringing more people into Orthodoxy than ever before. But there are some voices out there that I wouldn't recommend, so please, 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 if you find somebody on the internet that you like, please run it by your spiritual fathers and have them discern whether or not they're good for you. I certainly did. The last little note, and I know we're probably running late on time, but as I read through the spiritual father, the fathers of the church, I picked up a tool that I found, and that's the practice of nepsis, N-E-P-S-I-S. The definition of nepsis is wakefulness, watchfulness, sobriety of mind. Wakefulness, watchfulness, sobriety of mind. And it comes from the Egyptian desert, where people would go off into the desert, build a campfire, drink, and tell stories. And they quickly realized that if everybody got drunk and passed out, the lions in the area would creep up on them and attack them. So someone had to be neeptic, someone had to be wakeful, watchful, and sober-minded. Sort of the original designated driver, if you will. Well, the monks in the area around St. Catherine's and elsewhere love this as an analogy for sin, because sin, like the lions, could creep up on them and attack them if they weren't wakeful, watchful, and sober-minded. So practicing Nepsis just sort of allows us to take note of how things are affecting us and make judgments based on that. There's a parallel idea, a concept called the law of association. The law of association says that everything that we associate with, the people that we meet, the books we read, the media that we consume, everything down to the fats and sugars and carbohydrates in our bodies, everything that we come in contact with is either helping us or hurting us. It's either lifting us up or it's pulling us down, right? When we practice Nepsis, we're able to just sort of gauge what that is and make judgments and decisions based on being watchful, wakeful, and sober-minded. If Justin Bieber would have known about Nepsis and been able to practice it in his own life, he could have just paused for a second and asked himself, is this beer, this joint, these two idiots on my bus helping me or hurting me? Are they lifting me up or are they pulling me down? Right? Are they helping me be the best version of myself or not? And then he could have made decisions based on that. When I started practicing Nepsis in my own life, I quickly realized that I was drinking deeply from a fire hose of negativity, right? And it was poisoning my heart in a way that you can't even imagine, right? So I realized that, first of all, my job has a negative element to it. I did marketing, but it was essentially a sales job. I talked radio stations into playing music. Radio stations don't want to play new music, they want to play hits. And so their immediate response to everything that I brought them was no. And my immediate response to that was, you're an idiot. This is a smash. So I took that home with me. But before I went home, I'd get in my car and I'd turn on sports talk radio. And if you're an Atlanta sports fan, that gets negative very, very quickly. And then I would go to my house and I'd turn on the news and let the news spew forth all of this venom and vitriol and all the pundits yelling and screaming over one another and telling me why my life was terrible and whose fault it was. And I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily wrong with watching the news or sports talk radio, but it was poisoning me. I've always had people ask me, like, should my kids listen to hip hop or metal or play video games or whatever? And what I tell them is that it depends on how it affects them, right? There's plenty of people that can listen to hip hop or metal and like it for the beat or for the poetry or whatever it might be. There's nothing inherently bad about it, but we have to be watchful and wakeful about how things are affecting us. And I remember this one girl. I used to teach the juniors and seniors for 15 years at Sunday school. This one girl came in, and she was telling the class about a girl who was being bullied in her school online. And one of the senior boys said, well, why doesn't she just turn it off? And this girl had a very strong moral compass. She set her foot in the ground and she said she shouldn't have to. She was right. But the boy was right too, though, because people are awful, especially kids, to one another online, right? And I'm not responsible for what comes out of my radio or what comes out of my television, but I am responsible for being aware about how things are affecting me. And if they're affecting me in a negative way, I have the choice to turn it off. And when I did, once again, that was a moment in my life that it changed my life. St. John of Apamea once said, if we purify ourselves of wickedness, we will come to see invisible realities. But there's no point while we're still blind and wondering why we can't see the light. There's no point in stuffing up our ears and then moaning about the fact that we can't hear. But that's what I was doing for so many years. I was closing my eyes to God. I was stuffing up my ears. I was surrounding myself with all this noise and complaining about everybody because it was their fault that I couldn't experience God in my day-to-day life. When I turned it all off, suddenly I could hear God's voice, right? There was something, we hear God in a still small voice, right? That changed everything for me. So about 10 years ago, my boss called me up and said that they were breaking up Island and Def Jam. They were going to break them apart, and he had to fire everybody on the staff. He was brokenhearted about it, and I told him it was going to be okay, right? And not because it was going to be easy for me to change careers at 50 years old, but because I was no longer Scott Davenport from Island Def Jam, right? That's not who I was anymore. I was just Scott, right? Who's also an Orthodox Christian, who stumbles every day, and I get back up trying to be the person that God knows who I am. And I run into the arms of the church, not because I want, to be in heaven or I fear hell, but because I'm grateful to what Christ does in my life, and grateful for the fact that he pours out his love and his healing on me despite my brokenness. And I can gladly stand before you all tonight and say that today I'm an Orthodox Christian. Thank you all for having me tonight. God bless you all. Kalapaska. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. You stay by the camera.
Okay. Sorry. Any questions? Any questions online or anybody from?
Yeah. Let's see if I get any text.
Okay. Any questions from you guys here? Yes?
What did you do next after you got removed?
I went into the real estate industry, as a matter of fact. My entire family was in the music business. My grandfather and father are both in the Georgia Radio Hall of Fame. It was sort of a family business, but my brother got out early because he was bad at it, and got into the real estate industry. So that's what I joined. He's like, frankly, I would much rather deal with entrepreneurs than young artists who think they're special just because they can sing. So it's a little easier.
No questions.
Good. Anybody else here? Bueller? Last call.
I just want to make a statement that I did not pay Scott to mention me, by the way. He warned me that he was going to say something. But I'm glad that I could help you in your journey to Orthodoxy, really.
Thank you, Father.
It's an honor for me. And, we have so much talent in our parish family, and also people come from such diverse backgrounds and also experiences. Sometimes we take it for granted that we're all the same. We're, in the church, so we must be all the same, but we're not. And we're not in the same place spiritually, which is impossible. I think it's impossible to all be in the same place at the same time. But that's good, and it's healthy. And also salvation is not only dependent upon the individual, but it's collectively, and that's why we come together to worship in the church. Sometimes people say, well, Father, I can stay, not any criticism of anybody watching from home tonight, but I can stay home and, just pray at home. Why do I need to come to the church? And so we need each other. And not only that, we need to live in the reality of what it's going to be like if we are in God's heavenly kingdom. Just like we stand or sit next to each other in church, there's going to be people next to us in heaven. So this is a prelude to that. Now, you might say, well, I don't get along with everybody on earth. Will I get along with everybody in heaven? I'm kind of confident we will if we make it there. So living in the glory of God it'll probably diffuse all the negativity that we might have or things that keep us away from God. And so God bless you, Scott, and continue your journey.
Thank you.
And, I'm always here for you. So anytime you need confession.
I'll set it up this week.
Not publicly. We won't do it publicly like the early church, but,
Thank you,
God bless you.